hold your questions because we're going to keep talking about this. So I'd like to invite the rest of the panel. We're going to have Arup and Currie and Brown, who are the masterminds behind some of these calculations going on in the Edge app, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of these changes. But if we are to summarize, essentially we're getting better data, more transparent data, updated methodologies, and then fundamentally also looking at performance data in use. So hopefully addressing some of the questions that we already had in the audience, but really want to take a deep dive into this because fundamentally without data, the certification would not exist. So we really want to start maybe by understanding, Adal, you've shown some of the future developments and where the direction of Edge is going, but can you also talk a little bit about what lessons have you learned over the last 10 years of operating Edge and how you take that into a mindset of continuous improvement and what that looks like in terms of the software? I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to pass the microphone to the panel and yell a little bit for my questions.
Yes. So, as a bit of a background, I used to work in energy simulation software, and this software is quite complex, and we were quite proud to have a software just more and more complex every year. And the training for being able to use the software was around 2 to 3 months, just being able to open the app and then get some meaningful results. One of the lessons learned is that, that is important for certain buildings that are complex, yes, and engineers us love doing that. But if you want to scale, we need to be able to have a tool that only requires the important information to make a decision. Once you have that mindset, then it is easier than to say what is not needed, it is very challenging because every new input that we are adding in Envision 4, we also think of removing another one because we're trying to keep it as simple as it has been while trying to address the complex issues around regulation, around taxonomies, around complex building, around climate change, and ultimately around correct decision making. So simplicity is the mindset, the driving mindset. Alignment is it's close second, and make sure that we can keep creating edge experts that can contribute and keep using the tool correctly to making decisions.
So simplicity is an easy thing and a complicated thing. So,
I would say that, the simpler it looks in the front, the more complicated it is in the back. That's the rule, huh?
And that brings me perfectly to Adam's work. So Adam from Currie and Brown has been working on building the cost database globally. So anywhere you are in the world, you're putting in your efficiency measures and you're calculating what's the ROI, what's the investment. That sounds complicated. So how do you do it? How do you build a global cost database, and how do you make that as accurate as you can?
Yes, thanks, Eleni. It's, in short, it is challenging, very challenging to do, given that we have, is it 8,000 cities, roughly, that you need to be able to locate your project in and adjust the costs to that location and understand the implications of building there as opposed to in another country. So it's a big exercise, but it's exactly the sort of thing that we like to do. So for those who don't know Currie and Brown, we're a cost management business. So this is what we do as a business, and it's something that we've been doing in the UK for the last 15 years or so, specialising on sustainable construction cost and the business case. So we had a method that we could use from the UK in terms of capital, life cycle, maintenance, operations, bringing all that together, doing the business case calculations, but then to take that and to be able to scale that across the whole of the countries that Adal was mentioning. What was it, 120 plus countries using Edge currently. That was a big task, and we were really fortunate to be able to work with our business in the US who manage our global cost database. So they have huge amount of data that they gather from around the world that gives them insights as to what we would call indicator materials or products, technologies would cost in different locations. And that helps us to provide a sort of a calibration to be able to understand what the costs of an air conditioning system might be in Bogota as opposed to Mumbai, as opposed to the UK. and similarly with concrete and steel and other types of materials. So being able to draw on that database, but also the approach that we took was to split the cost data set, which is several thousand items of specification, into materials, into labor, to then be able to take those two cost items and say, well, what are the different types of materials? Is it a high technology product? Is it a lower technology product? What type of labor are we talking about in terms of the skill set and the expertise of the individual doing the construction work? And then how do we index that and adjust that around the world where these projects might be based? So by breaking the cost model down into that level of granular detail, it enabled us to adjust it and then build it back up again. So as Adele said, hopefully it looks relatively simple on the surface, but underneath it's being sort of unpacked and rebuilt every time you change the location.
Definitely sounds complicated. As a user, I can appreciate the simplicity. I guess from the end user perspective, how accurate is it? How much can users use that data in terms of making investment decisions? Because that's ultimately what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I'm sure my cost consultant colleagues I would be shot on the stage if I said, yes, it's fine, use Edge and you don't need a cost consultant anymore. That would not be a good outcome for us. But I think it's perfect for the stage at which you engage with the Edge app. So you have the opportunity to test lots of options, look at where you get the best return on investment, how you can get to your target performance levels most efficiently, most cost effectively, with the best impact on your life cycle cost, for example. And it's directionally accurate, we believe, and it gives you an indication that is useful at that feasibility scale. But bearing in mind that you've not put a building design into Edge, you don't have real detail of the actual design that you're building, it's going to be within that sort of plus or minus 15-20% range, which is what we would say for that kind of feasibility stage of design anyway. But it gives you enough to not spend your time on things that are going to prove to be a dead end. So you can target your efforts and your investments in the right location to then drill down to get the right numbers once you've got a short list of options that you're looking at, rather than working through a dozen or more different scenarios that you might be thinking about.
So someone could comfortably figure out what they need to invest in, take that decision internally, and then go and do a proper cost analysis.
Exactly. It helps you narrow the range of options that you're looking at, get an idea of whether these solutions are going to give you a good return, whether and what the sorts of budgets you might be thinking about would be, and then you go and drill into the detail, and you can then and it will give you hopefully a more accurate response, but it's not going to change your decision-making process radically.
Fantastic. Matthew, we've heard a little bit about embodied carbon. Can you tell us a little bit, because also calculating the embodied carbon of materials globally sounds very complicated. So tell us a little bit about that project, how you've addressed it, where's the data coming from? We've heard a little bit about Adele in terms of transparency, but of course, it'd be great to hear a little bit about the project.
Yeah, so basically what we're doing is trying to estimate the embodied carbon of key materials that are going into the structure of buildings. I imagine a lot of you might be familiar with environmental product declarations, or EPDs. These basically are trying to quantify, among other things, the carbon intensity of a product. So it might be your rebar, your concrete. And what we've been developing is kind of like an EPD, but it's more of a generic data set to represent the production and consumption of a given material in a given region. So for example, rebar in Europe. And the way we've gone about this is basically to build a model. So we've called it the Embodied Carbon and Energy Model, which does exactly what it says on the tin. And the sort of methodology we've followed is a life cycle analysis approach. And that's aligned with the modular structure of EN 15804, which is kind of like the default standard used in Europe for producing EPDs. And essentially, in this model, which is basically a big spreadsheet, we've got in columns different material region combinations. So, rebar for Europe might be one, conventional ready-mix concrete for Europe might be another. And then going down this model, we're looking at the different life cycle stages. starting from raw material extraction, transport, processing, all the way through down to kind of end-of-life processing and disposal. And then the actual data that's feeding into the model, this is really important, and a key decision we made was to use all publicly available data. So we've done a huge effort to kind of research and get data from around 370 different sources to feed into this model to make sure it's making best use of data that we have. And it isn't reliant on any kind of one third-party background data provider, which means it's kind of more robust. It means the estimates can be kind of used freely now and into the future, which I think is really important for a free, accessible app. And yeah, so that was a key decision. And then we've QA'd everything. So we've got materials experts, product LCA experts reviewing every step of the way, the modeling process, so that we think the numbers coming out of it are really quite accurate. But obviously we don't know the true values, so it's pretty hard to say whether within plus minus 1 or 10 or 15%, but we think they're pretty accurate. And then a key thing we do to make sure that these are relevant now is we regionalize the data inputs. So for example, anytime we have electricity being used to produce a material, we're using regional factors for the electricity production. We're using regional factors for example, the types of fuels used in cement plants within that region, so that the numbers are accurate for the region. And then to make sure it kind of continues to be accurate into the future, because obviously, embodied carbon in materials changes. It'll be different in 5 years because grids decarbonize, production processes change. So we basically set up the model to be transparent and updatable, so that the next time Edge V5 is being produced, they'll be able to use the latest data to develop these estimates. So.
And how hard was the geographical diversity of it? Because obviously in some places there's data available and in other ones maybe not.
Yeah, and that is tricky. And I think the good news is for Europe, we have a lot of good data. So the estimates, I think we have really high confidence in, particularly for the European region, also North America, Oceania, and Asia to an extent. I think we found real challenging data gaps, particularly in Africa and Middle East region. So that's been a pain point, but we also have good data to fill the gaps, and we have experts to kind of guide where we need to make assumptions. So yeah, I think that's
fantastic. Thank you. So I guess feeding onto that, back to you, Adal. There's obviously a lot of regulation in Europe. There's a lot of increasing discussion around whole life cycle carbon, EU taxonomy, changing, the near zero energy baselines. How does that all align with what Edge can do? And can Edge act as a proxy for some of these regulations, or with what confidence can users use it and know that they're in compliance with the changing regulations?
So in that perspective, originally, the intention is to cover as much as possible. So every output that will be in Edge available for users will be aligned and will be helping organizations to report the metric that says, the respective metric will be fully aligned. It will not be complete. So taxonomy, they cover more things than all green building certifications combined. So it's not the full picture, but it is part of the journey. And that's very important, because then it means that the green building certifications, besides recognizing efforts in sustainability, they are also part of your efforts for reporting correctly and third-party verified data. So we are trying to align as much as we can. So all the elements related to energy, they are fully aligned. That's why we're seeing more outputs that are generated, like primary energy and scope 1, 2, and 3, part of 3 directly in the app. And that's our way to then help people that is dedicated to reporting to get in the journey, to start with good high quality data, and then continue with whatever is missing. We are continuously evaluating what additional dimensions we can add to the mix. We are quite close to taxonomy development.